Now, just a little warning before we begin that there will be some major spoilers in this video for the book of Boba Fett up through the 6th episode. So if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, you may want to skip this video and come back after you have seen it. Okay, so I've seen a lot of people talking about, and I've had a lot of people ask me about, what we'll simply call Grogu's choice, where Luke, at the end of this previous episode, he sits Grogu down and basically says to him, you have to choose between Yoda's old lightsaber and becoming a Jedi, and Mando's gift, the Beskar chainmail, and going back to a life with him. And there's many different things or aspects about this that I've seen people discussing and that I'll try to cover in the video. Everything from those who seem to think Luke is being mean and cruel to being hypocritical for making him choose, for sticking to the no attachment rule when he himself obviously cares a great deal about his friends and family and doesn't forsake them, but now he's seemingly asking Grogu to do that. And then there's also a lot of discussion about what this decision may or may not mean for the future of Star Wars itself, because in all reality, we know what Grogu will have to pick here. We know what he has to pick in order to align with the sequel trilogy, and Ben being Luke's first student, as he himself says in The Last Jedi. Basically, what, if anything, would it mean if Grogu picks the lightsaber and stays with Luke? But before we discuss that one, let's go back to the first one. Let's get back to talking about Luke making Grogu choose when he himself doesn't or hasn't seemed to hold to the no attachment rule in the Jedi Code himself, where some have argued that he's being a hypocrite in asking Grogu to give up the Mandalorian when he doesn't give up his friends and family, where it was even thanks to Luke having attachments to his father that he managed to not only save him to bring Anakin back to the light, but to defeat the Sith and to save the whole galaxy. And first of all here, he's not asking Grogu to give up the Mandalorian entirely or forever. Luke said to him that if you pick the lightsaber, you may never see him again, not you will never see him again or can't ever see him again, or that he would be forbidden from ever seeing him. He's basically trying to explain to him that if he wants to become a Jedi, if Grogu wants to be a Jedi, sacrifices will be required of him, that he will have to put the needs of others ahead of his own wants and desires. Which is what the no attachment rule really means or is all about in the first place. It's not saying Jedi can't have friendships or things they personally care about or are interested in. They just have to set those things aside when push comes to shove, and always put the greater good first. Their love for the one can never be put before their compassion for all, which is what Anakin failed to do. And as I've said before, this is all the no attachment thing. It's all the biggest misconception people have about the Jedi. They're not expected to be emotionless, non-feeling monks who have no friends at all. When even in the prequels, where this belief comes from, we see that's not the case. We see that Obi-Wan and Anakin have a bond or brotherhood that both openly acknowledge, and that isn't prohibited. They're allowed to love each other as they're allowed to love and befriend others, but their duty as a Jedi must always come first. The problem here is that Luke recognizes that Grogu's heart is not in being a Jedi, that it might be more into becoming a Mandalorian and being with Din Djarin, that he might want that more, or that it might be what he actually wants altogether, that he doesn't want to be a Jedi at all. I mean, Mando is not just some good friend of Grogu that he'd hang out with on the weekends, if you will. He's not only just a father figure to him. Instead, Din Djarin represents someone who offers a whole different type of life to Grogu, a whole different way of being. An opposite way in many respects, as Mando himself realizes in the previous episode while talking to the armorer and learning about how the Jedi have a no attachment or forbid attachments. Basically, the Mandalorians are all about protecting and caring for their own, whereas the Jedi are more about protecting, well, everyone. And it seems Grogu may be more interested in that type of life and being a part of something like the Mandalorian way, more so than being a Jedi. And if that is what Grogu wants, Luke is willing to let him go. He's willing to let him choose. That's what he's doing here. He's letting him pick. He's not going to train him to use the Force unless he wants to be a Jedi. Luke wants to train a Jedi, not a Mandalorian Force user. Because being a Jedi is not a hobby you pick up. It's not something you just learn. It's not even a career you choose. It is a way of life, and it is a hard life, as Qui-Gon told Anakin back in Episode 1. Because you're always going to have to put the needs of others ahead of your own wants and desires. And Luke, in his own way here, is asking Grogu if he can do that, and if he wants to do that, and if he's willing to do that. Or is this not the life he wants? And so if Luke were really being mean or hypocritical here, he wouldn't have presented the gift to Grogu in the first place and given him a choice, much like he wasn't given a choice. He was kind of forced to become a Jedi. Instead, he would have just kept training him, which may have one day led to resentment from Grogu, and that resentment could have led to anger, hatred, and, well, you know the rest. In all reality, Luke is doing what's best for the Jedi Order, and at the same time allowing Grogu to forge his own path. And if Grogu picks the lightsaber, Luke will probably still give him the armor and explain that friendships aren't bad, but they are something you must be willing to let go if you want to be a Jedi. You must be willing to sacrifice and give up the things you care about the most to sometimes do what is right or required of you, what is best for the greater good. That's the test he is giving him. But in all reality, and moving on now, we know what Grogu has to pick here. He has to pick the armor to align with the sequel trilogy, right? After all, Luke said in The Last Jedi that Ben was his first student, and that along with him and a few other students, they started a training temple. We also know, as also said by Luke, that Ben or Kylo killed all his students when he fell to the dark side. And sure, in story, Luke could tell Rey the truth from a certain point of view in The Last Jedi about Grogu or about his first student. He could fail to mention he had a Padawan named Grogu before Ben and the other students even came along. It's also possible that Grogu does become Luke's student, that he was at the temple that fateful night, but managed to survive and once again went into hiding, and Luke didn't know about it. Or maybe he goes back to the Mandalorian, who would be around 60 at this time, and likely still alive and kicking, and who knows, maybe still in possession of the Darksaber and now ruler of Mandalore. In other words, in story, there are ways Grogu could pick the lightsaber and still align with the sequel trilogy. And in all reality here, the real decision on which he'll pick isn't or wasn't made by Grogu, we obviously know that. It was likely made or will be made by Disney. They're going to decide if they want his character to go back with the Mandalorian and be in Season 3 of that show, or if they want him to stay with Luke and to have a series that features the two together. And if we don't get a decision in next week's episode, which we may not, then we can maybe assume this was a sort of test run to see how fans would react to getting more Luke in this episode, more so than we got at that end of the Season 2 finale of The Mandalorian. Would fans be happy with the way he looked and sounded when he is featured more, when we see a lot more of him? Would they feel comfortable with a whole series with him in it or featured in it? Also, which ones do fans want him to choose, a lightsaber or Beskar? Do they want him to stay with Luke or go back to The Mandalorian? And most importantly for Disney, which one would lead to better ratings, more Disney Plus subscribers, and which one will make them more money? And so, in a way, I'm really hoping that we get the decision in this final episode, that it's more about a story choice than something a bunch of Disney execs looking at spreadsheets and numbers decided upon. Either way, if Grogu does pick the lightsaber, be that in this episode or at some point later on, it will lead to more speculation or discussion about the Mandoverse not being in the same timeline as the sequel trilogy. And I know there are a lot of people who say that would never ever happen, that they would never disown the sequels, if you will, that they would never do anything like flat out retcon them or even make them a part of an alternate reality. And for better or worse, I do tend to agree it's highly unlikely, mainly because it would be them all but admitting defeat or that they messed up with the sequels. However, as I've said before, and as I was just talking about here, Disney will follow the money. If they believe setting the Mandoverse in some sort of alternate reality separate from the sequels will make them more money in the long run, then they will certainly, at the very least, consider the option. And for those who'd say they never would do that with Star Wars, that it's something different or something sacred, well, maybe it is to you, maybe it is to me and all of us other fans, but that's not the way they see it. It's just another franchise to them, something they own and are trying to profit from, and they will do what they must to make money from it. Also here, alternate realities and timelines and all of that are quite popular with the mainstream audience these days, or should I say they're very familiar with it and understand the concept thanks to Marvel embracing it in the MCU. Not to mention, it's not like for years now, we haven't been seeing different iterations of the same character popping up all over the place, with Batman and Spider-Man being two prime examples. In other words, this isn't something that would throw the casual viewer for a loop. And so with this choice, there's almost this strange meta component to it, considering we know what Grogu's choice means not just for him, for Grogu himself and his future, but for Luke, who's the one offering the choice, and what it means for his future, and what it potentially means for the future of the franchise and the fan base should Grogu pick that lightsaber. Even though, yes, as talked about before, just because he picks the lightsaber and stays with Luke, it doesn't mean or wouldn't mean there aren't workarounds, if you will, for keeping everything aligned with the sequel trilogy. In fact, him staying with Luke could be part of some grand plan to make Luke in the sequels more, shall we say, palatable or digestible for those who didn't enjoy his portrayal in those films, though I'm not saying such a plan would work or would even be accepted by even most of the fan base who don't like that. But it could still be their idea at Lucasfilm and Disney to save the sequels, looking at something like the Clone Wars and how it quote-unquote saved the prequels for some fans. Though yes, there are some big differences between the prequels and the sequels, which I have talked about at length in other videos. Either way, I will say there is a lot of tension around the decision by Grogu, both in story and out. It has a lot of people, myself included, on the edge of their seat waiting to know what this little fellow will decide for himself and potentially for the future of Luke and the franchise. It's just kind of a shame that more people aren't excited for this final episode because of Boba Fett, you know, the character the show is named after. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me, which one do you want Grogu to pick? Do you want him to go with Luke or stay with Luke, or do you want him to go back to the Mandalorian? And what, if anything, do you think this means for the future of the franchise if he does pick Luke? Do you think this has any implications for the sequel trilogy or not? Is it impossible for them to retcon it, or is that exactly what they're setting up? Whatever you think, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.